Joan, when we spoke on the phone, you made some very confusing statements. You really appeared not to regard having cystic fibrosis as something problematic, something to feel sorrowful about. From the outside, for most of the people in this room, they find this confusing. Could you please explain to us what you meant by that?
I think part of it is, and I have to apologize for sounding a bit like a frog today. I woke up this morning and thought, oh no. I think the conversation that I had with you is, I don't dwell on having cystic fibrosis as a poor me story. Everybody in this room, all the patient communities, they all have their burdens. And I've learned how to live with mine to the best of my ability. And it's given me many gifts as well as challenges. And I don't want to gloss over the challenges because they're very real and very threatening at this point in my life. But I've learned so much from having to deal with a chronic illness, a life-threatening illness, and I've met wonderful people in the patient community. So I don't view it as a terrible thing to have happened to me personally, but something that it happened, and I'm trying to do the best that I can.
What was it your parents said to you about your condition?
My parents were amazing people. They adopted me as an infant, even though they had lost a 2-year-old to cystic fibrosis and had another child with cystic fibrosis who was 6 years old at the time I came into the Finnegan family. And my mother used to tell me, you're lucky because you know what your problems, what your challenges are. Most people spend a lifetime trying to figure that out. And I've been blessed to always be cared for by a terrific medical team, even when there really were no therapies. I was born in 1960. First CF drug was not developed and approved until 1993. So I've gone a long time without drugs, but I've also been able to benefit from every incremental improvement in drug therapies and frankly, models of care along the way, so that I'm on the cusp of my 60th birthday, which I'm very grateful for.
You're an outlier.
I am an outlier, absolutely, absolutely.
There must be mixed feelings there. You must have lost many friends and people who you identified with throughout your life.
Absolutely, including my brother, who was 15 at the time in 1969. And dying at age 15 is a horrible thing. But back in 1969, he had lived a long time. And I was 9 years old at the time. And it's devastating. There's not a day that goes by I don't think of him. And to your point, I've lost so many people. I don't keep a tally anymore because it's a morbid thought. But I do try to honor their lives by living mine with honor, with gratitude, and very proactively to manage what I have to do. So that's sort of my way of coping with that, because I think if you focus on the loss, you'll never get out of your own way.
How did you get involved with patient advocacy? One, you could be excused for feeling that dealing with your own disease is more than enough, but you chose to go beyond that.
Well, I think I had good training. My parents in 1955 were among a group of other desperate parents who started the CF Foundation. And all they wanted to do was to fund research, fund clinical care, and understand more about the disease. So I always tell people I feel like I grew up in the foundation. And as an adult, I got very involved both, and I still am, both locally in Massachusetts where I live and nationally. So I've always wanted to be part of this community, and I've always wanted to impart what I think I know and participate in solving the problems, because there's many. Obviously, I'm not a physician. I'm not even a science person. I'm an economy major from Brown University. But I've been able to work on different initiatives and really lend a patient voice, a broader community voice to all the efforts that the CF Foundation has undertaken in the last 30 plus years.
Yeah.
That's very gratifying.
Yeah. The CFF, there's many wonderful things. It alone is not going to cure cystic fibrosis. Tell us more about where you see groups, not just in your disease, but groups of that nature. Where do they fit into the big picture? And especially addressing this audience, everybody in this room's aware of CF. Probably a minority could really describe the disease in detail. And of those, a minority know about the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation and where it fits in the big picture. And to draw on your economics background, depending on who you ask, it takes over $1 billion to develop a drug these days.
Right.
And that, I'm assuming, is more than the budget of the CFF.
The CF Foundation has been a very innovative patient advocacy group. In the early 90s, they really pioneered the idea of venture philanthropy. And they partnered with industry and provided early stage funding to mitigate the risks of getting involved with CF. Because with 30,000 people in the US, maybe 70 to 100,000 worldwide, there really isn't the financial incentive to look at CF. And by doing this model, by providing upfront money with milestone accomplishments along the way, they were able to attract industry. And we've had tremendous success in developing new therapies because of that model. So even 5 years ago, we probably had 26 industry partners. Last year, the foundation was approached by over 170. So it's a model that works. We've had the delivery of transformative therapies in protein restoration. Excuse my voice. First one was with the funding from the CF Foundation with what is now called Vertex Pharmaceuticals. And they developed these CFTR protein modulators. CFTR protein is really the root of the problem in cystic fibrosis. That protein regulates fluid and salt at the cell membrane, in and out of to the airway surface. And when the CF gene causes the mutated protein to either misfold, not function, or not get made at all, it causes a buildup of sticky, thick mucus, which is the hallmark calling card, if you will, of cystic fibrosis. And from that mucus, you get a recurrent cycle of inflammation, infections, and destruction of other organs, including the pancreas, and other complications. So from that very, very small problem, you get a host of downstream symptom results. What the foundation did in the probably mid-2000s is they started with a small molecule and did high throughput screening to find a molecule that might have activity in that channel. It's a chloride channel. And fast forward, we had the first drug approval in 2012 that helped just about 4% of people with cystic fibrosis, very, very genetic specific mutations. And from that, we've had 3 others come to pass. And the most significant from my perspective, I've never benefited from any of these really transformative therapies because everything I do in my daily life is working on the symptoms, managing my symptoms, whether I'm on antibiotics, the 6 nebulized treatments that I do in a day, more when I'm sick, the airway clearance that I do. It's all geared towards symptom management. But these modulators, these drug therapies, are geared to the basic defect and correcting it, restoring the function. And I'm very thrilled that this past November, or actually October, and I started in November, finally a modulator came for me. And I started it, and I have felt better, aside from today with the voice. I've felt a lot better in terms of my production of mucus and my symptoms. And I'm hoping for 90% of the people, people are eligible for it because it attacks the most common mutation of CF, of which 90% of the population has. So it's been a remarkable therapy, but we're not done yet. We still have a lot of people who have no therapies, and certainly the foundation has announced a path to a cure, and that is a $500 million investment at least to attract the best intellect, the most innovative companies, I'm sure many of whom are sitting here, to apply for funding to help the CF Foundation innovate to develop the technologies that will lead to a true genetic cure. And that's something that's very, very exciting, something I've dreamed about my whole life.
And as you say, the prospect of gene therapy is potentially curative. Let's talk about that delicate issue, which is the dynamic between treatment and cure. And treatment is exciting. Cure can represent the end of a disease.
Right.
And we've seen that happen in several areas in medicine with hepatitis C, for example, where the cure in perpetuity obviates the need for the treatment. You, as me, we're closer to the end of our life than the beginning of our lives. How do you feel about that? The treatment versus cure, the fact that it is possible you might be cured by gene therapy, but it is more probable that kids being born these days with CF will be.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt, because I think, the idea of a cure, and even we're seeing the effect of the early start of these transformative therapies. We're starting to see the avoidance of the kind of experiences I've had, where you have colonization of bacteria that you cannot get rid of in the lungs, recurrent lung infections, lung damage. So the earlier we can push these agents into our population, the better it's going to be. So certainly the idea of a cure is fabulous. I think for me, at this point in my disease, even if I were cured tomorrow, the genes all worked, I have permanent lung damage. Those infections aren't going to go magically away. My pancreas is not going to be magically restored to be able to produce pancreatic enzymes, which I have to take externally, nor is it going to spring back to pre-diabetes state. CF-related diabetes is a very common complication of cystic fibrosis, and I've had it for 30 plus years. So I'm not under any rose-colored glasses about that, but I'm still thrilled. Even now I'm in rare air in terms of my age. Most of my birth cohort is long gone, and it's a privilege to be here, period. And to think the next generation, if you will, probably two now behind me, are having very different experiences than I did. And that's a wonderful thing in a very positive way. So I will work till my dying breath to bring that about. And it's so exciting, the technologies.
I think it's very interesting that Vertex themselves recently made a significant investment in cell therapies for the treatment of diabetes.
Absolutely.
And I think something that the people in this room who've been in this field for decades have hoped for is truly regenerative medicine.
Right.
So we see this hierarchy of gene-specific treatments, genetic cures, and then perhaps still a little way down the road, but absolutely regenerative medicines, which can also impact the course of diseases.
Right. And I think that's really the excitement from the foundation to announce this path to a cure, because it's out there. We tried gene therapy in the early 90s. The gene was discovered in 1989, and everybody thought it was going to be, real easy to just do gene replacement. Well, didn't turn out to be the case, but fast forward 30 years and we're in a totally different environment with totally different innovative tools. And I think the hope is that we can really leverage with the investments and the resources of the foundation to make that actually become a reality.
There are physicians here, there are engineers here, there are business specialists here, there are scientists here. What do you worry that they perhaps have not heard from the patient viewpoint?
I think, one thing I hope is that the patient is represented in all of those elements. Because I
Don't
think,
look at me when these are the people you should be looking at for this bit.
so represent the patient. I mean, a lot of companies in the past have sort of done the token, yep, we've got a patient on our board and that's it. But I think you'll find, and I had, before I stopped working, I did a lot of consulting work with companies that were developing cystic fibrosis therapies. And what they had, and the CF Foundation connects them to scientific expertise, clinical expertise, a clinical trials network that is second to none. But what they were really missing is the experience. And how does it affect day-to-day life? How does it affect a family? How does it manifest itself in the nitty-gritty? And I think that's so important to understand. And when you do, you make better decisions. And the foundation, the CF Foundation, has done that up and down its entire internal structure, so that we have much more incorporation of the community voice. And we've been able to do many more great things to impact that community in a meaningful way. And I think the other thing for me is that I hope people think about the cost to the patient. I mean, I know many people at this meeting and others will talk about the cost.
Oh, we'll get onto that later, don't worry.
Absolutely. But I think not many people think about, well, how does that actually play out in terms of patient copay? There's a lot of people in my community who, if they're on disability and they're not poor enough to be on a Medicaid, they're on Medicare. And their bill, their copay for this transformative therapy goes from under $200 to more than $16,000. And there's no help. And most people can't sustain that. And I think that's what I want people to think about as the end user. How do we start to address that from policy, from all sorts of different avenues? Because that's where the rubber meets the road, as well as the patient voice. And I realize how lucky I am to be represented by a very entrepreneurial foundation that represents and has worked so hard with the FDA, with the government, with lots of different stakeholders to advance this cause. And I think that's very, very important to have that sort of critical mass of people who are working on your behalf.
Thank you. Thank you for that clear exposition. Genetic disease is one of the worst tribulations that life can bring our society, but I think speaking to people like you, you just can't but believe that it is actually, after all, a wonderful life. So thank you for sharing yours.
Thank you very much.